Aha. I need to learn my cues. What's up, everybody? Happy Thanksgiving from the Esoterror Podcast. Today, Delane and I have a lot of interesting subjects about the Esoterror, but a couple of items that we wanted to get out of the way of respect. Delane, that's all you.
So, happy Thanksgiving, Adam, by the way, and happy Thanksgiving to the audience. We wanted to say in news, I know we're doing it a little late since we're doing it on Thanksgiving, but we wanted to say rest in peace, to Kevin Conroy, Batman of our childhoods, and who both Adam and I grew up watching, and Jason David Frank, who I wore the Green Ranger shirt for. He was a big part of my childhood, anyways, my favorite Power Ranger. And Chris Hemsworth, him and his family, as he had to make an announcement that he's stepping away, that he has early stages of what appears to be the signs of Alzheimer's. So,
yeah,
our prayers go out to all their families. And getting started with this podcast, I wanted to break down some definitions, as there's things that we discuss in this podcast, and by breaking down the definitions, then you can come back and check out these podcasts so that you'll understand what we're talking about. One is esoteric doctrine. So the definition of it is private, secret, confidential, of a philosophy, doctrine, or the like, intended to be revealed only to the initiates of a group. So an initiate is one, a cause, a process, or an action to begin. Two, admit someone into a secret or obscure society or group, typically with a ritual. Three, a person who has been initiated into an organization or an activity, typically or recently. And ethereal is one, extremely delicate and light in the way that it seems too perfect for this world. Two, chemistry of a solution having diethy ether as a solvent, or diethy ether. Sorry, I butchered that one. Ether in the spiritual meaning is the ancient Greeks saw ether as a godlike element and a substance that allowed humans to connect to spirituality and intuition. Ancient yogis saw the ether as that which was unbound and all pervasive, and the element of potentiality. Ether in the Bible equals abundant, a town in the lowlands of Judah allotted to Simon. And the Latin root is ether, spelled with an A, which means the upper pure bright air, or the fifth element.
Yeah. Does ether factor into the Philosopher's Stone too? Like as you were just talking, it kind of struck me that I seem to remember there having been like some Greek practices that observed that ether was associated with the Philosopher's Stone, or maybe I'm just thinking of the Philosopher's Stone as the fifth element as well, and they're actually two independent concepts.
I think you might be right on that, honestly.
Yeah.
And so with this, I kind of wanted to get into Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who was born in 1831, died in 1891, was 60 years old.
You're way better with Russian pronunciations than I ever was. Like, that shit just rolls off your tongue, and I'm like, how many consonants? What?
So she's a Russian mystic and an author, occultist, and medium who co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875 with Henry Steele Olcott. And they were a worldwide eclectic religion based largely on Brahmanic and Buddhist teachings. The reason why I wanted to get into that, you and I were discussing that after I was listening to the Rudolph Steiner, him reading Helena Blavatsky's entrapment in the occult world, right?
Yeah.
So the way it discussed it is that she had the abilities of a medium. She could basically see things, and she would get downloads, and she could understand teachings even not being taught them, so like I discussed that she deciphered this Buddhist text without ever having been taught it, and related it in a way that was a good way to translate it. And so anyways, he needed a medium to basically project his agenda, and he used Helena Blavatsky. And when the Hindu came over, the Indian Brotherhood, they wanted to use her for their own means. Again, another group wanting to use her for her means, but allow her to be more free. It said, according to the letter or the book or article that Rudolph Steiner was reading from, she was induced into these other states,
by drugs.
It doesn't specify.
Interesting.
And they say that everyone in the occult knows that that's a bad way to use those abilities, to induce a person into them like that and force them. And again, this person was using her for his own means. And the Hindus basically told him that if you let us use her, we won't tell the other brotherhoods what you've been doing. So he gave her up in exchange for their silence. So according to Rudolph Steiner, who's a Rosicrucian and a 33rd degree Freemason, and he's like a very brilliant man in the occult, like a true initiate, like I was telling you too, Adam.
Yeah.
So I've been listening to him a lot, and I just wanted to get her out of the way because she really changed the Western world and its belief in occult by creating the Theosophical Society and founding all of that. We talked about it before, how The Wizard of Oz is a love letter to Theosophy.
Yeah. It was a love letter from the author to his daughter as she was dying in a hospital bed too, though, yeah. Like it was those two parts, but I think that as it was a love letter to Theosophy is the reason that it has so much synchronicity in the timing of it to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, which I've been surprised, and granted, you and I are now the oldish generation and everything, is that we actually grew up like smoking pot or eating mushrooms and watching The Wizard of Oz to Dark Side of the Moon, and the synchronicities are pretty incredible. And there's no way that any of that was like actually intended. I don't think that I actually do think that Roger Waters has said in interviews that there was absolutely no intention of his or any other band member to have it sync so well with it. And so it kind of seems like there's very much like an id that both works of art, be it Dark Side of the Moon or the Wizard of Oz, sync up so well.
Yeah. And I was kind of more referring to the books because there's 23 books that were written for it that he had to just keep continuing on because the fans wanted to know what happened to Dorothy, what happened to these other characters. So
yeah.
And there's a lot of people throughout our history who, if you look back on who they were influenced by, it's Helena Blavatsky. And so Theosophy is any number of philosophies maintaining that a knowledge of God may be achieved through spiritual ecstasy, direct intuition, or special individual relations, especially the movement founded in 1875 as the Theosophical Society. And it's derived from the Greek words theos, which meant God, and Sophia for wisdom. It is generally understood to mean divine wisdom. And Theosophy teaches that the purpose of human life is spiritual emancipation and claims that the human soul undergoes to a process of karma. It promotes values of universal brotherhood and social improvement, although it does not stipulate particular ethical codes.
Interesting. Yeah, when you went down this rabbit hole about Blavatsky and Steiner, it was pretty interesting to me is that, of course, everybody today in pop culture is fairly well aware of the Aleister Crowleys and everything. And obviously, he was one of the biggest influences in terms of like bringing all of this information into pop culture after he was cast out of whatever original secret society he was a part of that they just weren't having him. That's when he kind of had like the the printing press Martin Luther moment of giving this information to the masses at large. I was just reading this comic that I couldn't even really get too far into. It's amazingly well done. It's just entirely too visceral and too relative. It's the Ministry of Truth, and this is just going to be a whole bunch of spoilers because like this book gave me the worst chills. This guy gets picked up. He's a federal agent, and he also believes in flat Earth, and so he goes to a flat Earth convention, and he has like some shadowy characters like, "Hey, you need to come with us," and immediately he's like, "I don't want to die. Like, you don't have to kill me. I have a husband at home. Like, please don't do this." And they're like, "Nah, nah, 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 it's fine." They take him to meet the Koch brothers, and the Koch brothers show him the firmament of flat Earth. Like, they fly out to Antarctica, and they could see the wall. And so he gets picked up by the Ministry of Truth, and he's being interviewed by an old man, like, "What did you see?" The guy tells him everything. And the director of the Ministry of Truth is explaining to him that all of reality is as we perceive it. And so what the Koch brothers were doing was funding the concept of flat Earth to where enough people believed in it, it manifested. And that's true of everything else, is that if you have any predominant ideal, and then it turns out the director is Lee Harvey Oswald, and it's like, okay, that's about the deepest thing ever. But they get to talking about Tulpa, and Tulpa is a Buddhist, what Buddhism describes as an entity that is initially formless, but can then become something that is influenced from the way that it is perceived. And so a tulpa could be anything from a Bigfoot to a lizard person to whatever. I've really been trying hard to find what the Navajo equivalent of that is. It kind of factors into the skinwalker concept, but it's a unique entity too. But a lot of these ancient cultures have this idea of particular entities that are generated and manifested by a viewer. It's almost like a bond or a parasitic relationship or whatever, is that they feed off of the psyche of what's around them. And the idea of the Ministry of Truth is that that is how all of reality is. And so their purpose is to keep the crazy and dangerous conspiracies from getting hold within pop culture. It was at about the time in the book that I had to put it down, is that they started talking about Aleister Crowley and esotericism and occultism and secret societies and everything, and about how that was the big game changer. Is that, previous that, you only had a couple of the majors of beliefs, like you had aliens, you had angels, you maybe sometimes had like little green men living in the mountains, but there wasn't anything too wild. And then after Aleister Crowley really brought a lot of these concepts mainstream, then it created this shift to where, you had like a lot of wilder, like Zionist lizard people type shit, like just completely beyond the pale. And at that point it was like, okay, this book is just popping off of the pages for me. I can't continue reading that one. The way that they were describing Crowley, and the way that you got into Steiner and Blavatsky.
Yeah, Blavatsky.
Yeah, Blavatsky. Yeah, it's interesting because you would expect that a lot of the foundations and the figureheads of this subject would not be somebody well known, but the moment you started talking to them, it just drew so many parallels in other people that are like really, they have their finger on the pulse of esotericism, like Neil Gaiman. If anybody has watched Sandman on Netflix, it has its highs and lows. Ultimately, I think it's done pretty well. But they have a Blavatsky-esque character, except it's a demigoddess, and one that once loved Morpheus, the Sandman himself, the king of dreams. And she is a muse, and she has been shifted from ownership to ownership in captivity of some of history's most profound artists and everything. And they basically just like lock her in a room. And if she isn't, just like her presence isn't enough to inspire them, then eventually they go down the dark path of like raping her and stealing that from her and then passing her on when it's their time to die onto the next person. So there's definitely a lot of evidence that you see of these two characters. It's just not so much in your face that you might even recognize it.
So I kind of want to go back to the comic book you were talking about, because for the viewer, the Koch brothers, and that's Koch, they owned a trucking company, and from what I understand, they were into some shady dealings with that company to help build their empire. And as everyone should know, Lee Harvey Oswald's the guy who supposedly killed JFK.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I was telling Adam, is when I looked up the Ministry of Truth, it's saying that Biden created it, from what I've seen.
Yeah, they had been talking about it for a while, and it was a bit of a. I was trying to remember myself because obviously, this comic was written in the time that was very much in the public sphere. Everybody was aware that it could potentially be happening. They were going to make this thing. But I feel almost as though that they were talking about it while Trump was still president. But I guess I could be mistaken about that, is that it just wouldn't, like the one thing, and I'm not going to lionize Trump or die on a fucking hill for the guy, but I think that would be one of the most things counter to his character is like in instituting Ministry of Truth. So I guess I don't remember it. And to clarify, in the comic, they don't say that it is the Koch brothers. They use a different name, but you realize, exactly who it is they're talking about. They just couldn't get away with putting it into print without it becoming like libel, I guess, even though it's a work of fiction, potentially whatever you call it, like a farce, that you're able to get away with doing that kind of a thing. As long as it's a satire, you could use anybody's likeness.
So, and the reason why I wanted to give off the definitions of the ethereal body and the ether and all of that stuff is because what the ethereal body is, and what it's also referred to as a light body. And it was Helena Blavatsky who coined the light body term.
Yeah, interesting. I'd imagine that there was like a lot of what she learned from these Buddhist texts that kind of speak to that concept, but I'm sure that it was her that really fleshed it out and gave it to us today the way that we consider it, be it from yoga to, like a lot of the ancient practices that have become very much in the pop culture.
Yeah, that's what I think too, is that she influenced us a lot, and that's why I wanted to bring her up. And so Rudolph Steiner, going back to him, he's an Austrian, he was a lot of things actually. So Rudolf Steiner's an Austrian occultist, social reformer, architect, esoterrorist, clairvoyant, Rosicrucian, and a 33rd degree Freemason.
That's busy.
Yeah, and so we'll go into the Rosicrucians. They're an ancient mystical order, the Rosicrucis, or Amorc, AMORC, aka the Rosicrucian order. They were founded by Christian Rosenkreis, who his symbol was a rose cross, and it's also called the Rose Croix and Rosy Cross, and it's associated with the legendary Christian Rosenkreis, Christian Kabbalist, alchemist, and founder. It was preserved perfectly in a hexagonal tomb 120 years after his death. So, according to legend, Hermes Trismegistus, who most people believe to be a fictional character. Okay. Yeah. According to his legend, he was so wise that the Egyptians named him Thoth, and Greeks called him Hermes. Mercury for the Romans, and the Hebrews called him Enoch. The Trismegistus title is thrice greatest for mind, body, and spirit. And so, with that, because that's what the Rosicrucians practice, is all the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, the Book of Thoth, the books of alchemy, the tablets.
I've said it before, but people will recognize Rosicrucianism as the sect in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the third movie. It's that sect of people that early on are trying to prevent him from finding the Holy Grail, the Cup of Christ. And he has the one on the boat, and the guy, they're headed towards the prop of like a giant ship. And the guy takes his shirt off and he has a rose on his chest, and he's like, "I am ready to meet my God, are you?" And they, dive off of the boat and everything. But now that I'm thinking about it, is that not also the case in The Mummy, were those Rosicrucians that were trying to prevent them from finding whatever the name of the priest was. I'm blanking on his name right now.
Imhotep, but no, I don't know if that was the same, but they are the same in the Da Vinci Code.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
The ones who are trying to protect the bloodline of Jesus. I mean, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it yet. But anyways, that's who the Rosicrucians are in that movie. You know, those are who I kind of lean more towards in belief. And I was telling you about Rudolph Steiner, so that's the one that, you know, I really resonate with, is him and his teachings and what he talks about and discusses on the occult. And so he has a lot of good lectures out there. He, you know, talks about the theory of relativity. That's what I was telling you about, Adam, where he was saying that it's right as far as we could perceive it here in this 3D, okay? Because even in the Book of Thoughts, it says when you go to higher dimensions, there's no words to describe what you can see, okay? So when he's talking about the theory of relativity in basic math, it makes sense. It breaks down and the math holds. Anyone else who's tried to explain space-time, their math falls apart. And so as far as we can perceive it, it is correct. That's why the theory of relativity is widely accepted. Although he says that if you have a conception of reality and what reality is, by that definition, it can't work in reality.
Right.
And it's not to say that the theory is wrong, because it's sound, right, by the math. And the reason why I'm bringing this story up is it's the way that I try to describe. And it's funny because I was watching Ancient Aliens last night, and the synchronicities are that, you know, what Albert Einstein said is he believed in a God, that if God was something, it was a vibration that was music of the universe, an alien song to the universe, a vibration.
It sounds very Tesla. That concept is very Nikolai Tesla. And now that you bring it up, like, it's kind of amazing to me that Albert Einstein never really acknowledged Tesla much. Like, and granted, they went their own way, but it's just kind of interesting that they had that sort of same gleaning.
But how funny in the last podcast that I said when I spent the moment with y'all, and then I told you I've tripped once since, and I was in that same experience, and it's like a vibration. It's a song, you know, it is vibration, it's living. And maybe I guess it could be alien, but it's just frequency, you know, because that is what the all is. And to me, it just, the synchronicities. But back to that, I guess, on the psilocybin, you know, since it was passed here in Colorado as of November 8th, because of a proposition.
Decriminalization. It is decriminalization of possession and distribution, right?
So Proposition 122, it passed by 53% of votes on 11/8/2022 in Colorado to decriminalize possession of and legalize limited use, 21 and older, to use, grow, and share. And it legalized psilocybin, DMT, and something else. I can't remember. It didn't legalize mescaline. It might have been LSD, I think.
Wow. I wasn't aware about LSD. That's awesome.
It might have. I'm not 100% sure, but I know psilocybin for sure. So psilocybin is a naturally occurring psychedelic prodrug compound produced by more than 200 species of fungi. Psilocybin is itself biologically inactive, but is quickly converted by the body to psilocin, which has mind-altering effects similar in some aspects to those of LSD, mescaline, and DMT. And so, I guess, and I know we're changing direction here. So, Terence McKenna, he had this theory of the stoned ape theory. I don't know, have you heard of it, Adam?
Oh yeah, the idea that we were basically lowland gorillas, like twice removed from gorillas we see today, such as silverbacks and everything. And that as we were coming to hunt, we would follow like a lot of ungulate animals. And as following them, we would find their scat, their droppings, and, you know, in flipping them over, we would discover these. I didn't realize that it was 200 genus of mushrooms that actually carry psilocybin. That's wild to me. And so it was us eating those mushrooms that were edible, but I can't imagine terribly nutritious, in that that is what sired what we recognize as our level of consciousness today, were these mind-altering mushrooms that we were eating under the game that we were chasing, scat. It's an interesting theory. Like I always dug it. I mean, it doesn't really strongly resonate with me, but I love the fact that that theory is out there, because I think a lot of the theories that we have is that you have the water ape theory too. And there are a lot of aspects about that are interesting, as to why our nostrils point downwards, or why our fingers wrinkle in the water, or why we have the body fat that we do. Like if you throw a chimp or a gorilla into the water, they're going to sink like a stone because of their fat content. So there are a lot of aspects between the idea of like a water ape or a stoned ape theory that neither really resonates with me too much, but I'm happy they're there, because it serves as like triangulating points of us to have an idea that it could be something that outlandish that we came from.
Yeah, I mean, let's take it one step further to Dr. John Allegro. And he's the guy I was telling you about on the team of people who deciphered the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay.
Yeah.
And he passed away in 1988, but he was highly ostracized for his theories that the tree of knowledge was actually a mushroom, and that the Hebrew people were eating these mushrooms, that it would rain and these mushrooms would grow and they would eat it, and it was God gave them the mushrooms, and the mushrooms were Jesus, which gave us our religious qualities, I guess. And that's what led us to worship, and that it gave us spirituality and a higher consciousness, and that to hide the secret from the Romans, the Hebrew people wrote it stories, allegories, to hide these experiences, these spiritual experiences that they were having from these mushrooms. And obviously he was, like I said, the only agnostic on the team who helped decipher the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, for those who don't know, were ancient Hebrew religious manuscripts discovered from 1946 through 1956 at the Qumran caves near the Dead Sea. And most of these were papyruses and tablets, mostly in Hebrew. There were some Greek and some Latin translations discovered. So anyways, you know, I'm more of a creationist myself, but the thought that people are talking about how mushrooms could be that forbidden fruit, and I've heard that theory before, you know.
Yeah, and also that it might have been the sacrament, the initial sacrament. There are a lot of theories about that, is that all of Christianity is like a hallucinogenic sort of worship modality. And, you know, that kind of gives it, that theory, credence on account of the fact that frankincense and myrrh are, they're like lighter hallucinogenic substances. They do induce a bit of a state, maybe something like nicotine being a mild psychoactive, or nicotine is just the hardest fucking thing to kick. Y'all see me smoking all the time. Or caffeine. Caffeine is very much a psychoactive, is that people become very dependent upon it because of its psychoactive properties. It just affects centers of your brain that are sort of outside of the realm of the centers of your brain that could register what it is that's happening. You know, there's a Starbucks on every corner because this is such a potent kind of a psychoactive. So frankincense and myrrh, when they're swinging, I always forget what that thing is called, but it's that ball of incense that they use in, I think it's exclusively Catholicism, that they will run down the aisles with that. And it does kind of induce just like a very mild sort of psychoactive state.
And Blue Lotus, I mean, it's not going to make you hallucinate or anything. And I've been talking to you about it, Adam. I do want to order some and drink some tea or something from it. What it was is from the temple of Osiris. And the Blue Lotus is also a symbol of him. and the shamanistic priests would drink this, and what it does, I guess the side effect, what they're supposedly say, is that you have vivid dreams.
Yeah. Which is interesting that it would almost exclusively access like the sleeping mind and intensify it and such, whereas it never really registered as having any effects within the waking mind, and that it is only in the dream realm. Like it is almost like the opposite side of the coin of ayahuasca is that ayahuasca sends you to the realm that everything stems from, or DMT, whereas this only exists within the realm of dream and sleep.
No, so there's a term, and I can't remember what it's called, and I didn't write it down. But when you take ayahuasca, okay, they say that the best kind of trip that you would have from it isn't being awake, experiencing it, as we would imagine that would be your real conscious awakening. They say it's when you don't feel anything and you fall asleep and you have very strong, vivid dreams. They say like that's the ultimate goal to most shamans, as far as like a conscious awakening and a real truly religious experience with taking I guess the catalyst
Yeah.
to a state of consciousness. Because look, I want to get away from, especially with us and on the show, calling them like hallucinogens, because I feel like that has a bad stigma carried along with it, when in reality these things are plant medicine, and when you use them as such, okay. And again, you got to try to be in a grayer area. You don't need to use this to reach those higher states of consciousness, but it does help you open other pathways in your brain and neurological pathways that help bridge that gap for you to get to your consciousness. You can also achieve these things by yourself. But again, like I said, when you're using it as a plant medicine, this is different than when you're taking it like a drug. I mean, and I know Adam agrees with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the ultimate, it really is like a fulcrum into neural pathways. And the fulcrum is the turning point of whoever it was, like the Greek scientist that had said, like, you give me a proper fulcrum and an according lever, and I will move the earth. I don't know if that was Pythagoras. I'm drawing a blank on that right now. Mushrooms, to me, are really nothing more, not so much as a doorway or a portal, but simply a fulcrum for your own mind to be able to start actuating something that was previously kind of unique to you. But it's also something that is very so much of like a home for our spirit and our psyche, is that it always should be treated with the utmost preparation and the utmost respect. When you were saying that it comes with a negative connotation from our generation, it did have a negative connotation. Everybody had that story that was just complete bullshit, where they're saying like, oh yeah, you know, Jimmy over there, he ate too much acid and now he constantly thinks he's a glass of orange juice that's going to spill over. Or yeah, like he tripped so much mushrooms that he only sees in black and white now, type of thing. I think that the culture has shifted, that there isn't so much as that kind of a negative connotation anymore. But the way the negative connotation is now are just the wholesale misuse of these things, is that they are missing out on the real portent of these plant medicines and just looking at it as like, you know, candy flipping or going to experience a music show or watching a movie or something, which are also not unvalid ways to utilize it. Like it could be healing, it could be wholesome, it could set your mind in a different frame, it could allow you higher echelons of attaining some kind of a spiritual side. But, you know, really, I think that these things should be viewed and used more as a sacrament, as something that you really ritualistically prepare for. You fast, you don't drink, you do not imbibe nicotine or marijuana. And then once you are experiencing it, then, you know, like me, I chain smoke. I know a lot of other people have like some of the most profound and healing experiences when they mix it with weed while they're tripping. But it's good to purge yourself before entering into this contract of whatever it is that the plant medicine presents us with.
No, and I completely agree with you, Adam. And even though I do smoke marijuana when I do trip, and I do hit my vape.
Endearing, yeah.
But But I want to go back to what you said earlier about Pythagoras, because it's funny you say it. And again, here we go, synchronicities, and the reason why I keep saying synchronicities is like Carl Jung said, is that once you understand what synchronicities are, you understand that there's no such thing as a coincidence. It is spirit guides, the universe, it is the all, it's communicating with you and taking you down a path. So Pythagoras, when you're talking about that, I want to get into the Pythagoras cult. And it's funny because Lane, shout out Lane from the Gentleman's Bureau, he sent me a video, and it's funny, in our childhood, we grew up watching those Donald Duck geometry videos, in math
Donald Duck
class.
in Mathemagic Land, yeah.
So in there it has the Pythagoras cult, right? And he has the pentagram on his hand because that's the only way you entered into the cult, and that was the symbol of going into the cult. And it was the five-sided star. And then Donald Duck gets it, and then he goes into it. And the reason why I bring it up is because you were also talking about the fulcrum, and with the five-sided pentagram, and if you turn it upside down, and the way that it was folding each line, because each line forms the three lines, right? And then you have the negative space, but everything forms itself perfectly. And from that, you could build the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio. And it forms down into smaller, perfect rectangles, and it goes in for almost infinity. You know what I mean? And because they knew that was hidden from the world, which gave us sacred geometry and such.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the foundation of a lot of the things that we understand today about sacred geometries and whatnot. I love when you're able to break those things down into their according cell. Like when you're talking about the pentagram being able to reduce into a series of rectangles, that type of shit right there is that sacred geometry. Of course, Randall Carlson is just one of the best teachers in terms of understanding sacred geometry. Like that guy has such a powerful insight. I believe he's a Mason, yeah?
I'm not sure about that. He may be, but I'm glad you brought him up because I was telling you about the podcast with him and Graham Hancock on Joe Rogan. And so he was talking, and we talked about this too on the podcast, is the vibrational frequencies. Okay. Mm-hmm. Using that as a form of technology. Again, like I said, and I can't prove this. It's like, and that's why I brought up the story earlier. And I was describing how Thoth said, when you see things from a certain perspective, it's hard to explain it in this realm. Okay, so what I've experienced with the all, it's hard to put into words because the vibration, the creation, you can't explain the act of creation into words to a person. I mean, through vibration and witnessing it.
Us understanding creation the way you're talking about it is like the adage of the sound of one hand clapping. It's not a possibility. It's not something that our pseudopod brain is able to grasp or function with because it is embedded in it.
Exactly. So, I mean, and it's not that I'm saying the audience is dumb or people are dumb or anything by that nature. It's just that, like Thoth says, there's certain things that when you see it in another reality outside of this reality, that's a higher state of consciousness or a higher reality. Some things in those realms, we don't have words to explain it here. What you're witnessing is so hard to put into words. So, I mean, going back to that, he said that on Joe Rogan, he wants to come back on, and he was talking about this group that has technology that they started. They said he built the groundwork, and this guy built the temple on top of it. So for the last 7 years, he's worked with Randall Carlson and kept him in the know. And he wants to go back on and explain the technology. They're coming out with patents because they want to do an open source PDF. That way the governments of the world can't shut them down and hide this technology. And they're not claiming it to be new technology, but technology rediscovered. So think the Egyptians, the Mayans moving these stones. And there's been a lot of talk about it, rumors, I guess, in the conspiracy world about vibrations being used. Right? Because of Coral Castle, the guy with the black box who said he used sound to move all them stones by himself that weighed tons, and he moved them by himself. And after he died, the black box disappeared. Well, he's saying that they discovered that everything in this world has a certain vibrational frequency, and they mapped out the vibrational frequencies of all these substances. Now, if you apply a vibrational frequency to this object at the right frequency, you can cut through it perfectly, as like what we would see at Pumapunku and other sites like that around the world, where we say that it needed like laser etching to cut these designs or cut these shapes out of these stones. He's saying that they could do that with vibration.
Well, and think about how crude a concept it is that we have to compare everything to the pinnacle of our science with laser cutting and such. Like that is a very, very crude voltaic, not voltaic. I'm trying to think like just the idea of using like energy and light in that regard it's kind of barbaric by comparison, because if you're using sound that is interacting with like the vibrational frequencies of everything, then that is material at its root, and being able to interact with it right there. That's why a lot of these things look almost like raw cookie dough and a cookie cutter shaped like a fucking dinosaur. Like especially the stones that you see in Peru or South America or Maya and everything, is that they are just so, they almost look like they were molded in a cast, more than they were cut, I guess. But you also do have such clean cut surfaces and everything, is that we compare it via laser technology, and we think that laser technology is the pinnacle for engineering in that regard, stoneworking in that regard. But really, if you flip that on its head and you consider that they were using some kind of like sound at a vibrational frequency, then you would just have, you know, the material at your whim, and you could do whatever it is that you want with it.
But mind you, even though vibration is very beautiful, and we talked about this in our episode where we talked about the cathedrals and stuff and having the resonance in the windows and how they had the vibration and they would trap certain moments in time through this frequency within the resonance of the building just by the architecture used. Sound can be used very badly too. Remember from the Hulk movie when they're using the sound frequency against him and he's crawling on the ground like that towards the paint.
Yeah, and LRAD cannons are a very real thing. When I was in DC protesting Bush's reinauguration in the Iraq War, they had LRAD cannons everywhere. Like they actually turned them on to a bunch of the what's his face from Anti-Flag, fucking what's Homeboys in the God, tip of my tongue.
I'm not sure. I listen to Anti-Flag, but I don't know their names.
God. You would know his name if I could think of it right now. I'm just drawing a complete...
fucking Henry Rollins.
Henry Rollins, yeah. So Henry Rollins was there with like a big anarchist movement. And so this was back in 2005 when anarchy really was like chaos and destruction of physical institutions and whatnot. Not what we know anarchism to be today, is that they're not saying no rules, they're saying no rulers. But yeah, Henry Rollins and a lot of his chapter of anarchists were just getting busted left and right. And I think that they were the only group of people, and you were talking like several hundred people or whatever, that were like smashing store windows over in the district. And they actually used LRAD cannons on them. I got to tell you, those fucking things are nightmare fuel. The idea of using sound as a weapon like that is fucking abhorrent.
Oh, and then go one further, even in Marvel. And again, remember, everything's hidden in plain sight. They just bash you in the head with it until when it becomes truth, then you're like, you don't believe it because you've been so bashed in the head with it to see it as a lie. In Iron Man 1, remember they developed the technology of that earbud that you have to put in so that when you turn on that frequency, it paralyzes them and they get that black vein like forming in their ear.
Yeah.
You know?
That shit was real scary too. And yeah, like, you know, the way that you put it is that when we see things in movies, it's the perfect predictive programming, because now whenever you bring it up and you see it in reality, they're like, oh, that's ridiculous. That's in a Hollywood movie, a work of fiction. And it's like, yeah, and that's exactly why they're showing it to you via that way, is that once you see it in real life, like it's no longer as much of a shock, but you're also just going to write it off as like, oh yeah, that's just something from a silly cartoon movie.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's a lot of things that they've hidden in plain sight, a lot of occult knowledge. And so I want to go over the definition of occult with this, just because there's a lot of things that in pop culture, they're going to tie into occult knowledge. They use actual magic and they show sigils, which, Adam, we got to do an episode on John Dee at some point, you know, just because of Doctor Strange and that being a big deal.
Yeah.
And the sigils they actually use in that movie are sigils that John Dee was drawing on the floor to communicate with angelic or demonic beings, you know.
Which sounds like what Solomon was doing in the first place with the lesser and greater keys, is that he had a way of writing these sigils that he actually could contain, utilize, and effectively, like, he was raping angels and demons with these fucking things just to capture their power. From what I've like come into, is that he was a very astute magus that was able to work these things. And so there's very much a parallel all the way back into occultism and esotericism of King Solomon having been one of like the progenitors of all of this, and John Dee doing so later. Yeah, I mean, John Dee was like the Victorian era, right? He was like, what, 17?
Yeah, he was under Queen Elizabeth I in her court.
Yeah.
And he's the one who basically gave birth to the way we view occultism now and sex magic now in the modern world. And Aleister Crowley took a lot from that, the sex magics and stuff from John Dee. So I guess getting into the whole circles and stuff and what you're saying, and of course I'd like to do another podcast on all of this stuff in a deeper fashion. But anyways, with the circles in occultism and magic, we've lost it now. But what you need them for is it protects you when you call on other entities. It protects you from them invading you or doing harm to you. Mm-hmm. And that's why there was an importance of a circle. And it's funny because even going to Full Metal Alchemist, right? Everything in transmutation, it had to happen with the transmutation circle. And then when Edward lost his arm, but he had seen the truth, right? He has the knowledge now. So he don't need to draw transmutation circles. He can complete the circle within himself, right? By clapping his hands, and he completes the circle. But it's funny because in Solomon, and we've talked about it on here before, the Temple of Solomon, right? Your Solomon is your temple, your libraries, your memory banks. He uses the Star of David, it said in scripture, to use demons to help him build the first temple, right? And assembly. With that symbol is a six-sided star, and it's as above, so below, with the two triangles. Okay, this also comes from Pythagoras and the whole. So breaking down triangles, you have 30 degrees, 60 degree, and 90 degree angles, right? And the 360. And so anyways, as above, so below, with the triangle up, the triangle down. But it is also a two-dimensional shape of the Merkaba, Metatron's cube, which is a fourth-dimensional shape, right? Taking three-dimensional shapes, putting them together to create Metatron's cube in the center, the way that we view it, in three dimensions.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I say the Merkaba is because the Merkaba is our energy. It's our life force. And Plato said that the universe itself has a shape of like a dodecahedron, where it has these energy points that forms out its aura. Basically like us too. We're in a sense similar to that. And so I'm just discussing it because when we take this energy within ourselves, completing the circle, that's why I feel like it's hidden in plain sight. You know, Adam, you know, you and I both resonate a lot with Full Metal Alchemist and a lot of the things that they put in the show. There's a lot of things in it that's very occult, and I feel very true in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like when creating the Philosopher's Stone and Brotherhood, and spoiler alert, they used the entire town with lines, and they formed the circle, the sigil, with the entire town, so they can use the souls from that entire
blood. The point of war is death. That's the profound thing about Full Metal Alchemist, is that all my life I was looking at, you know, after 9/11, we were invading everybody, and I was like, this has nothing to do with what happened on 9/11. You're telling me we're going to Afghanistan and Iraq? Like, these things are so fucking far of concepts from each other and everything, and it's like, oh, they're there for oil. And then that didn't really track either, as much as I was like paying attention. And what Full Metal Alchemist does so well is that the point of war is death. That is the resource, and the the main ingredient of a philosopher's stone is a living human soul. And that means that you have to brutally murder these people and then wash their blood into the very sigil that could be the size of a city or a town. And then you were able to activate whatever it is that you are performing. The purpose is the death itself. It's not the profit off of it. It's not the profits. It's not the security that we have in foreign chapters. Like, the purpose of war is death. It's that simple.
But in the show, one soul has like a one-time use of the Philosopher's Stone. That's why they're trying to kill an entire city, an entire battle,
to make a bigger stone.
Those souls into an actual Philosopher's Stone. And so Adam and I, since college, we always had this theory that a lot of the wars that happened throughout the time could possibly be from that, is that the people trying to create Philosopher's Stones. And the reason why I bring that up is in other cities that are from the 13 colonies and after our revolution, they have ley lines underneath that are sigils built within the cities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'd imagine even across in Europe.
Oh yeah, all over the place in Europe. I'm trying to remember the name of the hill or even where it is. It was something I think I heard on the Grimerica podcast. Shout out fucking Grimerica. Those guys are great. I don't want to jack their style, but one of the things I love about their formatting is that they have people email them or call them about the synchronicities they're experiencing. And I've just been thinking, like, we are so flooded with synchronicities lately, it's starting to make my head spin. But yeah, like when you see the important architectures, usually like the phalluses, like the Washington Monument or otherwise, they always are incorporated into a ley line of which the Masons are aware of, and there is always like an almost sigil-like seal on it.
So let's talk about that right now, since we're about to enter into this holiday of Christmas. Is that Nimrod? That's where the monolith and all of that came from, the phallus shape. Symbols that we see, right, is the tree, the Christmas tree.
Yeah.
And we would kneel down, right, and present presents. That's where the presents from the Christmas tree came from. And then the pine cones and all of that from Nimrod worship, Tammuz and Nimrod.
Yeah. Yeah, man, it bugs me out. Like, again, the way that we play around with language is that when we refer to it like, oh, happy holidays, like, oh, we're entering the holidays. We know that when you say the holidays, that does not incorporate Thanksgiving and New Year's or Valentine's Day further on. I think Valentine's Day just does its own thing. Like, when we say the holidays, they literally just pluralize the term to talk specifically about Christmas, because Christmas is now like a 3-month-long observation. Like, by October, everybody's talking about the holidays, and it's like, no, it's just the one. Like, hey, consume for fucking months on end. Like, good God in heaven. Like, I get very Charlie Brown and Grinchy about the whole thing at this point.
It's happy holiday Thanksmas.
Yeah. Talking about when you were talking about John D, I had this idea that I talked to Kate with a little bit, Living More Freely podcast, is that we're going to do like a collaborative show one of these days. And what I thought might be kind of fun is if we all of us chose a historical character that we would like fight. And so you would choose like John D, and I could choose Saint Germain, who I've been wanting to do a deep dive on. If you're familiar with Saint Germain at all. I was a little bit, but then after watching Castlevania, he's kind of a central character. He was also a historical character, and there are parallels between him and what you describe of John D that I'm finding really interesting. Like, I just looked him up. Count Saint Germain, Saint-Germain, Master Rakosi, or Master R, is a legendary spiritual master of the ancient wisdom and various theosophical and post-theosophical teachings, said to be responsible for the New Age culture and the Age of Aquarius, and identified with as the Count Saint Germain. So this was like 1710, 1784. And I'd be willing to wager that if I go down this rabbit hole, then we're going to start finding a lot of incorporations between he, John D, and otherwise. Even on the Wikipedia page, you only scroll down a little bit, and they have like an entire page of his esoteric activities. So yeah, I think it'd be fun. Or you do your deep dive on John D. I'm sure we could do a whole episode about that, and then I'm gonna do one on Saint Germain. because that guy just sounds interesting as hell. And the more that I look into it, the more that there's just so much resonance and synchronicity with a lot of the things that we've already spoken about.
Well, so you remember I was telling you that, and I don't remember when they had said that that was the case, but modern science had agreed that if you define the soul as anything that was definitive, if you tried to define the soul as something that wasn't obscure, unexplainable, if you didn't not acknowledge the soul's presence, then you wouldn't be considered, you wouldn't have any credibility in the world of science. And so that's why you have people like H.P. Blavatsky and Rudolph Steiner that we're not historically taught about. You know, we're taught about these other lectures and agendas from other people that they want you to know about. They don't teach you about the ones that are actually going to teach you how to deal with yourself, how to deal with your consciousness, your double, your shadow self.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I recalled having seen something the other day regarding a Saint Lucifer. Let's see if I can find it right now as to where the term of being associated with the devil comes from. Is that this guy was kind of doing the old Martin Luther thing, and Martin Luther was around the time of the printing press, and so he really was like instrumental in getting the word of God to the masses. Before that, you had to rely on the priests because people weren't largely literate, but even if they were, all of the texts were locked up in the church. So with the printing press, it gave that to the hands of everybody else. Yeah, it might have been Lucifer of Cagliari, just talking about how we are never really given the works and the insights of like the true historical characters because of the influence of our culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't really find anything on it. It sounded like a bit of a deep dive, and it could have been completely hokey, but it was something that resonated with me like, oh, that sounds really interesting.
Well, I mean, there's a lot that we could deep dive on. I'd like to piece a lot of historical characters, you know, Elizabeth Bathory. There's a lot that are associated to the occult.
Help me out. Which one was Elizabeth Bathory?
She's the one who killed all the virgins and bathed in their blood to
Yeah.
make her skin look younger.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to open this one up to any of our listeners. If y'all just want to flood us with comments and insights as to any synchronicities you've been having lately, is that I very much am like the zodiac nerd here, the astrological nerd. And I got to tell you, I've just been having so many synchronicities again. It's starting to make my head spin, like a lot of fortuitousness, but also a lot of like encounters and opportunities that I've been having and everything. So not to completely jack America's steez, but anybody in the comments below, feel free to email us, comment, send us a voicemail regarding any prominent synchronicities that you've been having lately, because it'd be great to just have more interactions with the community and kind of factor that into, you know, making it a relationship between all of us. We greatly appreciate everybody that's taken the time to watch and listen.
Yeah, I think the conversation's been officially hermetically sealed, and definitely keep an eye out for that interdimensional bling. We're still in the process of trying to come up with ideas for that. And I guess if you have any ideas of things that you'd like to see out there, leave that in the comments below.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyhow, again, happy Thanksgiving. Everybody get fat and sleepy off of a bunch of awesome food, and don't stress having to deal with the family. We know that that's not always a terribly fun time, but you know, you're only a couple of beers away from, you know, making a holiday merry.
Yep. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Bye, guys.
See you the next time. Adios.